Hi, Kevin Wright back with another property finance video. And what are we talking about this week? Well, is property for you? So if you're thinking about property but you're not in it yet, I'm going to give you some key pointers to consider before you make your decision. So stick around while we drill down into this. So property investing, is it for everyone? Is it for you? Well, it's certainly not for everyone, is it? Because, hey, look at the number of people in the UK, 60 plus million. How many of those invest in property? Probably not even 5%. Actually, it's about 2 or so million. So that's less than 5%, isn't it? So these people that invest in property, they're a comparatively small number. So by that token alone, investing in property is certainly not for everyone, but let's look at if it could be for you. Now, people's perception of investing in property is buying a property and renting it out. Whilst that is certainly true, it's not the whole story. Now, there are people that made a very good living out of property for a great number of years. They've actually never rented out a property or been a landlord at all. How does that work? Well, they essentially buy and sell property rather than hold on to it and then rent it out. Now, their objective is also to make money, but they make one big chunk of money by selling the property rather than a smaller drip feed of money month after month by renting it out. And these sort of people don't really want to be landlords. They don't want that responsibility of renting out a property to a tenant. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's an equally valid way to make money out of property. So how would these people do it? Well, the most obvious way is to buy a property in some degree of dilapidation, fix it up, and then sell it, usually through an estate agency. And you could call that a buy, refurb, and sell strategy for making money out of property. A more niche way is to buy a property, do very little to it, and then sell it through a different medium to the one you bought it from. Now, that's a bit more of an advanced strategy. Now, I deal with that on my advanced training course, the Ninja Investor Program. Now, there are other ways to make money on buying and selling property without getting your hands dirty. There's a term called planning gain. This means applying and getting approved planning permission to alter and improve a property in one way or another. It could just be extending it. It could be converting it from one use or from its current use to a new use that's more valuable. It could even be knocking it down and putting something new in its place. So these planning game people invariably don't do the work themselves, although they could do. So their way to make money out of property is to identify something with the opportunity of a planning gain, make the application and get the planning approved. That pushes the value of the property up, and then they'll sell it on to someone who actually wants to do the work. And there are people that made a whole career out of that. And of course, another way of making money by not renting out property is to be the one that buys it with the planning permission that we've just spoken about and actually carries out the work. That tends to be more extensive work, whether it's demolish a new build or a more significant conversion, and sell them on to their end user that wants to make it their home. All valid ways to make money out of property without ever having to consider being a landlord. Now, if you want to be a landlord, that's the other way of doing it. You buy a property and then rent it out for the longer term. Now, not only does that give you a consistent, regular income from the rent your tenant pays, but you also get the potential of capital appreciation, the value of your property rising over the next 5, 10, 20 years even. And it's that drip feed of money now, plus the potential uplift in capital value that people find attractive. And the caveat is, if you want to do that, you have to provide a service. And the recipient of that service is the person or people or company paying you rent. Now, there are different types of tenant. There are people that want to rent from you for it to be their own home. And that could be a single person, a couple, or a family. Typically, that would be on a single tenancy agreement, an AST, a short old tenancy agreement. There are people that want to rent not a whole property, but only a part of a property. Typically, they would want to rent just a bedroom from you in a larger house, and that would be a multi-let or an HMO. And there are people that want to rent from you, but only a few days, and that would be people staying with you on their holiday, typically for 7 or 14 days, although there are other variations available to that, or on a serviced accommodation basis, an Airbnb type basis, where they could literally stay by the night. Now, each of those tenants have different expectations. So whoever's renting out the property as a whole takes on an element of responsibility. It's their responsibility to pay the bills, to pay the council tax, the utility bills, as well as paying your rent. And they generally want something that's in pretty good condition. It doesn't have to be sparkling, wowing condition. You know, you're not trying to sell it to them for hundreds of thousands of pounds. You just want to sell it to them for a few £100 a month, okay, in more affluent areas. People just renting a room within a larger property tend to be a little less self-sufficient. They rely on you to pay the bills and the council tax, and they really only want to be responsible in some cases for their own room. So the communal parts of the property, that can sometimes be best dealt with by an external cleaning company coming in. Now, short-term tenants tend to have a high expectation of the quality of the property. They do want the wow effect in many cases, because this is something special for them. It's where they're going to spend their holiday, or it's where they're going to stay away from home and use your house or flat as an alternative to a hotel. So they want a home from home, and they tend to want quite a high standard. So different tenants have different expectations. Now, for the vast majority of people, finance plays a role somewhere in this too, because very few people actually buy for cash and just park the money there, even if they've got the cash, and you know, many people haven't, but if they did, they might buy for cash initially, but they want to refinance that, pull their cash out so they can do it again and again. So your finance ability is another factor. Can you get finance? Now, if you're doing any type of buy and sell, you shouldn't be using a mortgage for that. Check out the video I recorded for why you cannot use mortgages for buy, refurb and refinance, BRR. So there are other short-term finance options like bridging or development finance, or even borrowing the money privately if you know people that can lend it to you like that. Now, that type of finance is easier to get. If you're going to hold and rent out the property, then it would be on a mortgage of one description or another, whether it's a buy-to-let, HMO, serviced accommodation, commercial, semi-commercial, whatever it might be, depending on the tenant and the type of property you've got. So now the question is, are you mortgageable? And different mortgage lenders want different things. So a buy-to-let lender would generally lend to someone that with no landlord experience, as long as they own a property already, whether it's the one they live in, or it could also be possibly the one they rent out as well. The more complex ways of renting, i.e. HMO, serviced accommodation, holiday let, they generally want some landlord experience. And that could be anything from 1 year to 2 years or even 3 years in some cases. So if you plan to buy a property and rent it out and get it financed, a key consideration is, are you able to get finance? Now, over the years, I've met and talked with many hundreds of landlords. And in my experience, landlords generally want to do the right thing by their tenant. In other words, they want to provide a quality service for a tenant who will stay there for as long a period as possible. It makes sense to a landlord to provide enough quality in their product that a tenant is happy to stay there year after year after year. If a tenant leaves, you've got a void period where there's no rental income coming in until you replace that tenant. So for the smarter landlord, you want to minimize the times over the years where that happens. And certainly there are people that stay in a property for 5, 10, and even more years than that. So it's in a sensible landlord's interest to provide a good quality product. And my experience is that majority of landlords have every intention of doing that. Now, there are rogue landlords, just like there's rogues in every walk of life. But in my experience, most landlords want to do the right thing by their tenant. Now, some degree of selection of tenant is going to be quite important, because essentially you want a tenant that will pay on time every time, and you want a tenant that will respect your property. Doesn't mean to say that it doesn't get lived in and has natural wear and tear, but they actually keep it in an acceptable condition, let's say that. So those really are the main points to look at if you're thinking of getting into property. If you've enjoyed this video but you're not subscribed yet, hey, click that button and make sure you get the property video that I release on a weekly basis. It's on a Thursday night. So I'll be back next week with another property finance tip. See you then.
If you enjoyed watching this video, did you know every Monday morning at 8:30 I do a live Facebook Q&A. So if you want to start the week with checking out some answers to your property finance questions, click the link here.